To celebrate a message of truth and possible transcendence, UAPs and the challenge of being a man in this world of dimming integrity, this is Neon Galactic. I'm James Falk. Thanks for joining us. We live in complicated times. If the recent release of the new UAP documentary, The Age of Disclosure, tells us anything, it's that we're living in a moment of profound complexity, where deep and fundamental questions need to be asked and, as best they can be, answered. Some of those questions involve UFOs. Others involve the nature of truth, reality, and the power of information to change lives and shape perception. Some of the biggest questions, to my mind, involve our human character, integrity, and the use of language as a means to actualize a better world. Our guest today, Greg Scaduto, is a financier, an Army veteran, a writer, a father, and an advocate for UAP experiencers and transparency, who has lately become affiliated with the UAP Defense Foundation. His Substack, Broken But Readable, is profound. It wrestles with many of the issues we've discussed on this show: UAP, NHI encounters, the meta crisis, autism, the human soul, masculinity, friendship, trauma, consciousness, artificial intelligence, and more. It's also rife with a keen financial perspective that helps dissipate some of the fog around economic interest in the phenomenon and how it might be brought to bear. Part of his work includes powerfully written, deeply empathetic profiles of people in his life, friends and acquaintances, that Scaduto renders in exquisite detail, drawing out life lessons and subtle perspectives to help build an overall argument for living a well-examined life in a world drunk on absurdity. One series of UFO experiencer narratives offers his readers a vicarious but deeply penetrating glimpse at what it means to brush up against the impossible and come away transformed. Scaduto's voice is strong, unapologetic in its fierce repudiation of injustice and intellectual turpitude, whether such comes from power-hungry politicians or ill-informed UAP debunkers. Reading his work, I see myself reflected, the version of me that wasn't too afraid to speak out, too cowardly to embrace real mystery, too distracted to make an argument for why humanity better get its act straight and soon, or else. This is the version of me I'm working so hard even now to make real. Scaduto helps me believe that transformation is possible, not just for me, but for all of us. And at this moment in the long, staggering human effort to survive and thrive on planet Earth, this is the message we need most. We'll discuss his life, his writing, the world, UAPs, NHI, and what it means to be profoundly engaged in the project of human life. Welcome to the show, Gregory.
Hey, James, thanks for having me. Awesome to be here. And I gotta say again, I love the newscaster voice, and I just wish people would do more of that because
Yeah.
I read somewhere, I heard maybe that it makes you pay attention more when you got that tonal control, and I listened to every word of that, not because I'm a narcissist, but it's just easier to listen to. I love it. Love it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, man. I appreciate that. You are a worthy, subject of description in terms of all the work that you're doing and, the progress I think that you're helping to achieve in the UAP subject and elsewhere. I'm obsessed with character, and it's been my journey. I mean, I don't know if you know this or not, but I was a junkie at one point. I was a heroin addict, and I had to kind of get clean and straighten up my life. And it's one of the few places, like in the rooms of NA or recovery or whatever, where you're actually forced to look at yourself and say, what have I done wrong? Where's this all gone awry? And I think we've forgotten the need for people to have sort of strong moral bearing and integrity. And I think that your work kind of rhymes with that in a lot of ways. And so I appreciate what you're doing, and I think you're obviously a very talented writer. So kudos to you
Well,
for that as well.
thank you so much for saying that, and I really appreciate how you're without apology just opened up about the heroin thing. I didn't know that, and thank you for telling me. And there's just not a lot of people who I think can come back from that. And people don't realize like these things that happen to you in life, they just arise from a winding river of prior causes over which we have little control. And that could have been me, it could have been any one of us. And not everyone is able to pull themselves out of it. They blame other people and they don't take accountability. And I admire that in recovering addicts. So congratulations and thanks for telling me that.
Yeah, no problem. I'm hoping for transparency in government, so I believe in transparency in myself. And honestly, it's something I'm not ashamed of because, my wife and I often talk about it. It was a hellish time for us, but we
Mm,
survived it over time. And now we're in such a better place that wouldn't have been possible if we hadn't had that,
yeah,
catastrophe. So it's like,
yeah,
it's kind of I wouldn't take it out of my life. I wouldn't want to relive it, but I'm glad it happened because it allowed me to kind of, like I said, look inward and figure out a better way to be.
yeah,
So enough about
yeah,
me. My audience has heard a lot of it before. About you, your blog is amazing. It's on Substack. It's called Broken But Readable, and it covers all of these things. Let's start with who you are and how you ended up writing your blog, and then as much as you want to kind of fit that in, how you ended up covering the UAP topic as a part of all that.
yeah. I realize as I'm about to say it, it sounds kind of cliche, but the writing thing started from depression, like from clinical depression that kind of runs in my family, and just a chemical imbalance kind of thing, not from any traumatic event. And in therapy, one of the challenges that she put to me, my therapist, was you got to find a hobby because I was just bickering with my wife and working 80 hours a week and just basically being a miserable human being. And I just told her I don't have any hobbies, so I don't know what you want me to do. And I've written about this. It's just like an awkward silence where she just kind of looks at me, and I just to end the silence, I'm just like, well, I like to write, and I think I'm pretty good at it. And she just said, then write. And I was like, all right, it's pretty simple. And one of the first essays I wrote was about my son, who is nonverbal, non-speaking autistic, and it was my first like lesson I think that I learned in writing that it's not just really not about the prose. It's just more about not lying. It's about being honest about what happened to you or what you went through or what you think other people are going through, and admitting it and talking about it honestly and not worrying about you know how it might be perceived, and instead just to accept it as part of humanity, that we're flawed. And I think it resonated with a lot of dads who, we don't like to talk about emotion. We don't like to acknowledge that, some of us, we might cry in the car in the driveway before we, get out and go in and face our family. And that's something that, a lot of us have gone through. And I think it was just refreshing for a lot of men and a lot of women to, who raise children with disabilities, just to hear somebody talk about it honestly. Um, so that was kind of how that was kind of my first, I guess, non-UAP piece that led to other things, which ultimately led to me getting published in U.S. News and World Report, which happened about a month ago. It was on autism. But I did I can get into the UAP origin story, Spark Notes version if you want.
Sure. Yeah.
Should I
Yeah.
do that now? Yeah. So the
Yeah. Yeah.
UAP thing also kind of for me has its origins in my writing. I was not a UFO person. It's not that I was a skeptic or that I was dismissive of it. I just didn't think about it. I just had a lot of other priorities, getting out of the army, raising a family, trying to figure out, once I take this uniform off, who am I? What's my identity? How do I find meaning in life? All those great questions that at some point we all wrestle with, or most of us wrestle with, hopefully. Uh, and 2023 June 5th was the day that the debrief article came out. Leslie Kane, Ralph Blumenthal, and I swear it sounds crazy, but it popped up on my Facebook news feed. I had never heard of the debrief. I was immediately skeptical of frontier science as a concept, I guess, and it just seemed like it wasn't a serious outlet. But I looked up who Leslie Kane was. I read the David Grush article. I was astounded. I looked up who the journalists were. I found that they were credible. And just I think from my Army background, being an Army officer, having the TSSCI clearance, handling classified information, interacting from time to time with senior folks like a GS-15 type character, like a David Grush, it just hit a different register for me than I think it does a lot of people. Like having been involved in inspector general investigations or been involved being been an investigating officer in different contexts, you realize the significance of a report being referred to Congress from the inspector general of the intelligence community, and you're thinking to yourself, well, it's pretty serious. What could this mean? I don't think he's known for practical jokes. inspector general, at least not to, not to my knowledge. So I became very curious. I immediately texted all my friends, and they all laughed it off. And it was a feeling of loneliness. I didn't understand, like, why doesn't anyone else care about this? And I kind of, I guess, withdrew a little bit into my podcast, audiobook life when it comes to UAPs, and I must have read about
Everyone
25.
everyone knows it in this subject, man. The deep dives,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and it's like it's like it feels almost like a guilty pleasure or something that's embarrassing or something, like you're into some weird shit. But you can't really talk about it with most people because they think it's weird. And what snapped me out of that though was living in New Jersey when the drone. I don't know why they call it. You know why they call it a drone flap? I don't really understand that.
Yeah, I
The
mean
drone
the
flap.
dismissal.
Uh,
Yeah, the drone flap.
yeah,
The
when that happened, my wife saw something. I wasn't home, but she was rattled by it, and she's not someone to talk about objects in the sky. Not that she's dismissive of it, but she's just not interested in it. And so and she doesn't make stuff up. Like, she's pretty, pragmatic and level-headed, and I believed her. And I think after consuming all of those books and podcasts and documentaries, I had a moment where I was like, why don't I just write something publicly about it? I didn't have a social media presence at all. I wasn't on any platforms really, and I created an X account. I used my real face, my real name, and I said, hey, if you are a U.S. military veteran, why don't you stop pretending that any of this is normal? Stop acting like it's a hoax, and let's remember, like, in the Army we had the warrior ethos where you don't leave a man behind. You got this guy David Grush, you got Graves, Gallaudet, these people who are being mocked by journalists who have no idea what they're talking about. Why don't we just say something in support of them, because that's what we do. Uh, that's the culture that we were brought up in, and let's remember that. Let's live those values. And it was just a few paragraphs. I had no followers, but it ended up making its rounds, and Lou Elizondo ended up reposting it, and all of a sudden, it had like hundreds of thousands of views. And that was around the time where I was going through the therapy thing, and I was like, maybe I really do have a knack for this writing thing. And then I just became, for better or worse, one of those Substack guys. And my wife's always telling me to get off my phone, and I'm that guy now. But I started writing on Substack about UAPs on a lot of topics. I tend to focus on marginalized groups because in my experience of raising a child who can't speak, I'm instinctively sensitive to people who aren't being heard. And so I've written about transgender women. I've written about Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang province of China. I've written about Native Americans. I've written about autistic people, and I've written about UAP experiencers, which I'm very interested in. And I've written what I hope will be considered like sample chapters one day of a book, a collection I'm trying to write of, these accounts. I interview people. I try to find them. I try to have conversations with them to make sure that they're legit, that they're sincere, and I try to tease out the details of what happened to them and just listen, and write about it as accurately as I can, and make it kind of a collaborative process. So it's something I always say, like, it's something I want you to be able to show to people, so you don't have to keep explaining yourself. And I want you to, I don't know if like be proud of it is the right way to put it, but I want you to be comfortable with it. And so I want to make all the edits that they're comfortable with, and make it into something that has some utility. And so, like, that was the Unmeasured project. Like, I called it the Unmeasured because the whole concept of, like, just because you can't measure it doesn't mean it's not real.
Yeah, and
And so
I'm just to
that's, yeah.
say those are beautiful pieces and really, really striking in terms of, giving you a glimpse into what it means to be in that moment with, that person. It's hugely impactful.
Yeah,
So
I
well
try to
done.
like I really like put my heart and soul into those because I think it's important for experiencers to be treated with dignity, because it's not just because something hasn't come across your desk, just because you haven't experienced it, you haven't seen it yourself, it doesn't mean it's not real. And it's clear from the emotion in the people I talk to. A lot of them were men my age, working guys who had normal jobs, they have families, they have responsibilities. These are not weirdos living in their basement, not contributing to society. They're respectable people, social workers, um, one was a yoga, she was a yoga instructor. Uh, a guy who worked in the arms industry, the gun industry. There was a guy in Germany, Patrick Neitzel, who was in Customs and Border, their equivalent of like Customs and Border Protection. So he's a federal law enforcement officer. So yeah, I mean these were normal people just like you and me, and they had these experiences. And I try to channel the John Mack kind of uh, non-judgmental, like tell me what happened and let's write it down kind of clinical approach, but have the prose be a little more accessible to people for modern audiences. I think just have very short attention spans. So, the way I write is a little bit I don't know, some people it's not for everybody, but I try to make it something like an experience, like a sensory experience, so that you kind of feel like you're there. So yeah, that was that project.
Like I said, I absolutely adore it, and I hope that it continues, and eventually we can have you on the show to talk about a book because I think
That
that
would be
that's
great.
exact.
I love
Well,
that.
that's
Yeah. And
exactly
thanks
the
for saying
kind
that. I
of,
appreciate
yeah, no problem, man. People need to empathize and understand what these people are going through, and they also need to understand who they are and the context of, the encounter shows you, if you dig deep enough, that these aren't, snowflakes or whatever you want to call like whack jobs. They're not. They're full on serious people, people that you would run into anywhere in any life, and they are having these profound experiences. And a lot of times they don't even really want to talk about it. It's not like they're out trying to get
No,
attention
they
or,
don't. They're hungry for somebody who will just sit there and say, tell me what happened, and talk about it, and like let's just hear what it was like, so that we can understand it. And to have somebody say that to them sincerely, it's one of the most meaningful experiences of my life. To have met these people, I've done five of them so far, and I still talk to all five of them,
yeah,
because it was kind of for all of them a profound experience to have somebody take the time to not trivialize it, not try to explain it away, not try to tell them it was probably military aircraft when it obviously was not military aircraft. It's a giant triangle, a matte black triangle the size of five houses that's sitting there over your head, not making any noise. That's a pretty traumatic thing to have. It's very
yeah,
earth shaking. It's just pretty jarring, I think. And like
yeah,
we ought to have a little more compassion for people who, whatever plane of reality that this happened, and it happened to them. Like it was a real experience that happened to
yeah.
somebody. So I think we ought to stop laughing at them and take it a little more seriously.
Yeah, I mean, and what they're experiencing is saying fundamental things about the nature of who and what we all are, where we're at, where we're going, and so for
Hmm.
that reason, it becomes, a necessity for us to wrestle with this. There's a signal there that we need to, ascertain the source of, so we can figure
Hmm.
out what we're about. I mean, it's for
Yeah,
all of
I mean,
us,
what all of this
even though we
is
don't all have the experience.
yeah, there are cracks in the world. People see these cracks, like which are these objects. We don't know what they are. Some people are on training ranges, in the army, and you're wearing nods, like night vision, and you just see weird stuff, like with infrared. Martin Heidegger, the philosopher, said that as our tools get more sophisticated, uh, our perception, or the limits of our perception, expand, and we see more stuff. It's like
Yeah.
this is normal. Like this is okay. Like Ryan Graves said, we didn't see these objects until we upgraded our radar systems. Like I just hear Heidegger when I hear Ryan Graves say that. And, I think we ought to think through history, like about, what Lou Elizondo has made the comparison so many times to microorganisms. Who would have thought that, there's a whole ecosystem of these little squiggly little creatures that you can't see? Like, doesn't that sound ridiculous? But, it wasn't until we had microscopes, we had sufficient optics to be able to see them, that we don't laugh at it anymore. And every revelatory discovery in science started that way. Um, and people, for some reason, they don't want to talk about that, and I think we should. Yeah.
What's interesting, I was had a discussion with Dean Radin recently, but even before that, I had one before an interview, and he was talking about presentism, which is the idea that we are always, at the most advanced point. I mean, first of all, it envisions a linear progress for human society, that it's only continually going up. There's never any kind of cycle or diversion away from that straight line. But he was basically saying every generation is convinced that it has the world almost figured out, that there's a couple of
Yeah.
details that
Yep.
they will, find in a few years, and then everything will just kind of crack open. And that's never true. And invariably, they've come upon something else that totally, made them accept that really we're still profoundly ignorant as a
Yeah.
species. There's so much
Yeah.
more we don't know than we actually do.
One of my favorite examples of that that just is so humbling is there was this article in the New York Times in like 1911, and I don't remember the exact wording, but it was like, "Do you know how much coal it would take to get to the moon, you idiot?" Like that was like the message of the article, and it just shows you that like, well, when you're material science, your propulsion science, like when these things change, the opportunities become much more expansive. So don't be so arrogant.
Don't
And we
write
learn
things
that
off.
lesson, we think, over and over again in history, but we don't get smarter for some reason. But history is littered with those examples. And what you're talking about is, Kantian in nature. The more you see is just going to raise more questions. It's not going to answer all the questions. It's just going to raise more questions. The more you find out.
There's a quote of yours from the Substack that I'd like to read. The question of UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena, has lingered in the margins of modern science like an unanswered letter, troubling, persistent, and faintly embarrassing in polite company. Yet we do ourselves no favors by averting our gaze. To dismiss these phenomena reflexively is to be intellectually timid rather than skeptical. We fear the collapse of categories, the undoing of assumptions, but truth does not arrange itself to flatter our frameworks. It humbles us. It forces us to stand before a chasm and acknowledge we don't know how to get across it. The real task of inquiry is not to pretend it's not there, but to think of ways to cross it. I thought that was particularly on point and just about what we were just now talking about. What fascinates you most about these experience or stories that you've collected and everything else, having to do with the subject? Is there a particular, thing that draws you forward, or what's the big nut for you?
Well, I think of it in a few layers, I guess. One is the human emotional layer, which is like, I like connecting with people. I do it through humor. I do it, just through authenticity, just talking to somebody like I am with you right now. I enjoy that experience. And it's a very unique experience to talk to somebody who's had something like that happen to them, who've had abduction experiences, who have had profound encounters, who have had out of body experiences. And it's worth understanding. But it does a service to the experiencer to to lend them that dignity of just listening without judgment and trying to understand instead of trying to explain it or trying to uh, you know file it away somewhere in a filing cabinet it doesn't fit in. So I think uh, it's the human aspect I think that is maybe most compelling, but also there are so many topics out there that like there's nothing really that new about them. You can read a book, you can look it up on a search engine or AI, or you just find out about it. But this is not one of those topics because uh, the literature is not really established. It's not taken seriously in mainstream academia or in mainstream media, and so I like to say that you can get so huffy about the overclassification of government secrets, but you could also just ask your neighbor, what they've carried and what they've been through, and actually listen to them and try to understand it because many people have had these experiences who don't talk about it for obvious reasons. But many people have had these experiences, and you can learn so much that's not available in any AI chatbot or any search engine by having a conversation with somebody, and it will open up your mind. Like when you talk to somebody who has seen one of these cracks in the world, witnessed it, looked through the veil and seen something that nobody else has seen or that nobody you've ever talked to has seen. That's a pretty profound experience. To be able to do that, I think it's a privilege to earn the trust and to have the reputation where like these people will talk to you openly because they see you as honest. So that's something that I hold dear. Is having done a few of these, you kind of get a little mini reputation among these, and a lot of them know each other, experiencers. So I think that's what those two things fascinate me the most: the human element, and then I guess the epistemic uh, element where you're learning something that's hard to learn that you can't get from a book, uh, not from many
Absolutely.
books. Yeah.
Well, there's a broad range of interpretations and theories as to what's behind the UAP phenomenon, and um, it's fun to talk about, but they're all over the map, and some people are really committed to one explanation over another, and it can lead to even, arguments or bad feelings. One avenue that has been sort of, I wouldn't say ridiculed, but it's been used as a weapon against some, uh, against UFO people who are interested in UFOs more broadly. There's a spiritual kind of thing that happens where people often have this ontological fracture when they encounter UAP, and it works sort of like a spiritual epiphany, and they ultimately end up kind of moving in that sort of direction where they become more, concerned about the soul and those sorts of things. I'm one who is very interested in that aspect of it, and I read books like Jacques Vallée and others that sort of hint at phenomenologies that rhyme with what the UFO is bringing to the table, and they're often having to do with religious experiences. What are your thoughts on that, and how do you think about all of that?
Well, what's so interesting is that I guess, reckoning with the UAP subject has made me much more interested in religion and interested in spirituality. From the time, so I remember being 11 years old. I used to hate going to church. I hated it. I hated having to sit still. I hated, being Catholic. You kneel down, you stand up, you recite the hymns, you go get the communion, and you shake hands with I just hated the rituals. I hated every aspect of it. I remember I was like 10 or 11 years old and sitting in the car back seat and saying to my mom, this is all so stupid because it's religion is just like it's just an outgrowth of the culture. I wouldn't have used these exact words, but like it's just where you were born. Like if we were living in India, we would be Hindus. So like why do we think Catholicism is so great? Like it's silly.
Fundamental truth. Yeah, yeah,
Um
exactly.
and I remember my mom saying like, that's okay that you think that it's a sign of intelligence, but we're Catholics, so you're gonna go to church. She wasn't dismissive of it, but and
Yeah,
I thought that I was so smart for thinking that for so many years, and it wasn't until recently that I stopped thinking it was bullshit because when the UAP thing happened, I was like, if this is real, what else is real that you know that I wrote off? And what's so fascinating to me are the areas of overlap between Eastern philosophy and Hinduism and Buddhism and what some of these guys have told me and girls have told me.
yeah,
Like, um, they're seeing a humanoid figure that looks blue and it has jewels, all over his face. It's just like certain deities in Eastern religions. Um, and it's the three of them, three of the people I talked to all saw a blue woman. And it's just interesting.
yeah,
It makes you wonder. And you go back in history, you go back to non-dualism with the ancient Greeks, you go back to the Christian mystics and the Sufi Muslims in the medieval period and transcendentalist philosophy and all of these, this is not new, is my point. That the idea of a soul
yeah,
uh, has been part of the fabric of humanity since forever. Um, and it's only in recent years with this cacophony of industrialization that we've forgotten about it and we start worshiping machines and we think that having a PhD in astrophysics means you know more about the universe than a Buddhist monk. Well, you actually don't. You're only looking through one lens there, professor. So interestingly, you would think learning about UAPs makes you write off religion more, but for me, it had the opposite effect.
yeah. No, no, yeah, absolutely. And I'm right there with you on all of what you were just talking about, especially the sort of non-dual um, hint that seems to come through in a lot of experiencer reports, and a lot of scholars who are studying UFOs ultimately kind of come back to the idea of the universe as one, and there being some sort of deep, perhaps quantum linkages, perhaps even deeper than that. And I think that it's in, it's interesting to me because at the same time that that's happening, there's also this like quiet revolution that's going on in philosophy and neuroscience, where the idea of there being some sort of conscious fundament, I guess, is becoming more and more accepted by scientists in the field and by reputable philosophers, and
Yeah. And a lot of
it's
people I
good to
think don't
see.
even know what does it mean to say consciousness is fundamental. It just means that the material world around us arises from consciousness and not the other way around.
Yeah,
And I think there is empirical evidence to support this. There is the double slit experiment.
mhm,
When they're focusing in on these waves of light, you're seeing a particle. When you're focusing in, when you don't focus on it, you see a wave.
yeah.
So um, there
So
is a
much of
lot we
quantum
don't
physics
understand.
hints on an
Mm,
entanglement and the measurement problem and all these different like things that have been big mysteries that we've wrestled with since 1905 or whatever it was. It's like we want to kind of we put it on a shelf. At least mainstream physicists, for the most part, have put it on a shelf and refused to talk about the metaphysical implications of it. But then a
hmm
lot of the greatest ones were the first to be like, this is telling us something huge and about
hmm
the nature of reality, and became faintly mystical themselves. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
so,
yeah.
but as a society, that happened in 1905, and I think we're still wrestling with the information that came out then and has continued to come out since. And all of this is part of the same, revolution. It's like we had the Copernican revolution in whatever year that was, 1400s or 1500s,
hmm
I'm not sure. But that was a total shift in how we viewed the orders of the universe. And I think that we're in the middle stages or even the early stages of that same kind of shift. And UFOs seem to be a message that are indicating that. From whom? That's the big question, right? Is it from our own psychology, from our own higher selves, from a neighboring universe or a neighboring planet? I mean, it could be any of those things or all of those things, but there's definitely seems to be that fundamental message at root, which,
Yeah. Yeah, I
in my
think you got your
opinion,
finger on I think you got your finger on something important. People obsess over videos. Mick West will just not stop with these, individual video clips. Um, that I guess it makes people feel clever to, you know, in a very technical way, look at video footage. But what they fail to understand is that there are limitations to this way of observing the world. This is self-evident. You don't see things through an iPhone camera lens, Neil deGrasse Tyson, that you see through a microscope, that you see through infrared, not night vision optics, that you
yeah.
see through a FLIR, gun camera, um, and the optics matter. And we ought to be asking ourselves, like, well, what are these orbs that people seem to see only, when the light hits right, when they're wearing certain devices on their face? Uh, this has happened before, like with microscopes, with other things. Our instruments got more sophisticated. We started seeing weird stuff, and that should spark curiosity. That should not spark a desire to dismiss it and to prove to the internet how smart we are. There's so much we don't know. And when you try to explain something that the whole thesis is that it defies the laws of physics as we understand it, and you're invoking your entire argument rests upon something that relies on the laws of physics, on light and camera lenses and the things that these objects are defying, and you're saying, well, I can't see it on my iPhone, so it must not exist. Like, don't you hear yourself? Yeah, that's what I think when I hear a lot of these, so-called skeptics talk about it.
I mean, and it just seems remarkably incurious for someone who's supposed to be an advocate for learning.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
there's been a couple of columns, I guess you can call them, or Substacks that you've posted recently that I kind of wanted to dive in a little bit about what you were talking about there.
sure.
Um, One of the things that kind of straddled both of them actually was the presence of financiers or whatever you want to call it, and within ufology, there is a little bit of paranoia from folks when people with suits are stereotypically involved in these conversations, as if it's almost as if they equate every business person who is trying to figure a way how to bring that to bear in ufology is Peter Thiel or something. It's like there's an immediate association with a commercial interest and with sort of megalomaniacal struggle with that.
You nailed it. You got no, you got
Yeah, yeah. But the types, the billionaire types. So can you sort of reiterate that argument for my audience, and let's explore that because while I understand the fear, I do also understand that this is all going to take it's going to take all hands. So how can we be inclusive and moving forward while at the same time making sure that one particular aspect of the movement doesn't get more advantages or corner
yeah.
the market, so to
I
speak, for
think I know what you're
profit?
talking about. I mean, I think you hear things like, well, you can't trust what David Grush is saying because he, was a government, he was, in the intelligence community. Well, first of all, like the only people who have access to this stuff, I'm sorry, they were in the IC or they were in the military, because, these sightings happen on remote training ranges. They happen at 30,000 feet with optics and sensors and radar that is not available to you. So you ought to just accept that there are people in the military who have profound integrity and have courage, and uh, that's a possibility too. That David Grush is just a guy trying to do the right thing, and let's not write that off before we have reason to. And the same goes for billionaires or millionaires. First of all, I have never been fond of the idea that being a millionaire, even a billionaire, means you're unethical. I think sometimes it does. I think, having been, you know, in the senior ranks of companies, like you see more instances of sociopathy. I think that's pretty well established in the research. But you also see a very high level of competence in many cases. And you see people who are selfless and who are good leaders, and they made it to where they are because their friends wanted them to get there because they loved them or they respected them. And that's the case for many wealthy people. They're not evil because they have money. Many of them inherited it. Many of them got lucky. Many of them uh, were just good leaders who had administrative competence and were, multi-potentialized, multi-talented people who did things that other people couldn't do, that the economy valued. And that doesn't make somebody, that doesn't mean they're unethical. So it's a profoundly simplistic way of thinking to think, well, I'm pissed off because, I was born in this shitty situation and I don't have a lot of money. I don't have a lot of resources. Well, I'm not happy about that either. Like, I don't want people to suffer. I don't want people to live in poverty. But the answer is not to have this attitude of scorn for people who aren't, going through what you're going through. Um, so I think it's disappointing, when I hear people with that simplistic framework, write off an entire facet of society or echelon of wealth, or social stratum of wealth or socioeconomic status, simply because they exist on that level. Simplistic. I don't know if is that what you were talking. Is that what you're talking about? I don't know if
Yeah,
I
yeah,
addressed
no,
it.
absolutely. I mean, one of the sort of, I guess, lingering questions is how do we, so there's technology that's associated with the UFO, and it's something that has value in the market, but also value in terms of the state we're in as a planet and where we might go in the future. And some people get worried that if, corporations get involved, there's going to be sort of walls put up around some of that technology, or there's often talk about a quiet war that's going on between the legacy program and billionaires like Peter Thiel after the tech. And a lot of what we're seeing in terms of disclosure is sort of the slogging back and forth, between those two power centers. How can we, accommodate people who, I mean, first of all, do you think it's okay to have an eye for commercialization of the UFO? And how much influence should that have? I guess that's a simple way to put the question.
Um, yes, I mean, of course, like anything, as far as I'm concerned, like you can, as long as you're not impinging on the liberties of other people and you're not causing harm to society, it's not wrong. It's not inherently immoral to commercialize something. Um, and in fact, commercialization of many things has led to profound improvements in quality of life. So, I hope that we can get out of the mindset that the very idea of commercialization or having money is evil, or people who are interested in that are wicked. But I think what the fundamental truth that people miss is that this is, I mean, people look at this whole situation and they see nothing but malice. They see evil, they see lies, they see deceit, and they see self-interest. And there's certainly plenty of that that's going around. But what I see much more of, and I'll bet the same is true of you, James, is I see disorder and chaos and a lack of moral leadership. And it's very similar, it's remarkably similar to pre 9/11, like the intelligence agencies, everything was these stovepiped agencies that hoarded information, and they were competing with each other. They wanted to get the medals, and they wanted their friends to respect them. And so, they weren't collaborating. There wasn't ODNI coordinating amongst these 20 something intelligence agencies, sharing information about Osama bin Laden. And what a tragedy, that we had to find out the hard way when 3,000 people incinerated. Some of them I knew, uh, because people were too proud to set their egos aside. I mean, the parallels are very, very eerie between that and what we're seeing now. You have troves of classified information who very few people understand in its totality. It's in silos. It's in a bunch of agencies and defense contractors who do not communicate with each other. There's no ODNI, there's no governance over this process because there is no leadership. And because there's no leadership, there's no understanding, there's no coordination, there's no advancement of human progress. And so that is the fundamental problem. It's not because there's rich people involved. It's not because, David Grush wanted to serve his country and now he wants to talk about some weird stuff he saw. That's not the problem. It is a lack of a moral spine in our institutions and in the private sector for addressing this issue honestly. They won't address it honestly because fundamentally they're concerned about protecting their egos and not embarrassing themselves, and that's really a poor way to live your life, I think.
I think it's a way to live your life that we're all kind of trapped within. I mean, some of us have tried to find ways out, and maybe we're succeeding, but I think that as a whole, we're kind of culturally bound up in this system that is very egocentric and
How many
teaches us to
arguments
live
can
that
be
way.
ended in an instant? You can just take the wind out of somebody's sails by saying, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah,
sorry I did that. I shouldn't have done that. I
yeah.
made a mistake. Like how quickly the argument, how quickly you get on the phone with somebody, they're so fucking pissed off, right? And you let them vent, and then you just say, Bill, I'm sorry. And then it's over. And then you're starting to talk about the next thing you have to do. It's the same thing you learn when you're 5 years old. Treat people with respect, uh, own your mistakes, um, apologize, forgive. Forgiveness is going to be a huge part of this. Um, Amnesty might be a huge part of it because we're not be able to get any of this information if all these people are terrified that they're going to be locked away in a cell somewhere or have to go to Moscow. If this stuff gets out, I mean, that I suspect that a large portion of this is terrified, intelligence professionals and Raytheon executives. I'm not picking on Raytheon. I don't know if it's them. I mean, it's probably them. I don't know. Lockheed, certainly.
He,
But they're people with families. They're not evil. Maybe many of them are not evil. But they don't want to go to prison. So it's easier to lie. Certainly,
yeah, yeah.
it's easier for them to lie. But Lincoln didn't. He didn't want to steamroll the South. When the Civil War ended, he said if just 10% of the population in each state accepted, for allegiance to the Union, then they would be accepted. Just 10%, and that was an act of profound forgiveness and mercy. And look where we went after that. And so the people who are really angry about this ought to sit and think about the complexity of what's going on here, and how important recognizing the shared humanity that binds all of us is going to be for moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, is the object to get even or to get better? And I
Yeah.
think that those are the choices that we're gonna have to weigh as we kind of continue to move into this topic. I mentioned
Mhm.
at the top of my intro, the Age of Disclosure documentary, which was riveting, and it was impactful to see people of such gravitas and institutional experience come forward and say that there's something deep going on. There was something that came up from Michael Schellenberger, who was a journalist who I'm not that into, but he writes a lot, and he wrote about the UAP subject. And one of the things that he wrote recently was that there was a Rubio staffer who was saying we're headed toward some sort of massive disclosure. That came out almost the same day or the same day as Rubio going on Sean Hannity's show and basically saying, I don't know what they're talking about on
Yeah,
agent
yeah, yeah,
disclosure.
yeah.
I was talking about something, I don't know.
Yeah, I
They,
thought it
they
was
saw
a
things flying
remarkable
around.
walking back. Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
obviously him trying to walk it back. And I wonder, I mean, just if I can get your sort of comment and perspective on whether you think there's been this meme that's been out there from, some in the subject who view Trump as like this guy who's going to rip the cover off the swamp and suddenly make everything transparent for folks, that he's like a hero of the people, and they're hoping that he does that in regards to UFOs. I don't see it. I think that if he tries to achieve some sort of disclosure around UAP, it will only be to advantage himself or to distract from something else that's going on. That being said, it would still be useful if he did it. But what are your thoughts on the whole thing? Do you think Rubio and Trump may be the disclosure
Well,
administration,
I
or
think
is that a
I
pipe
mean,
dream?
I'm of the same opinion as you that, Trump is a morally bankrupt narcissist, uh, and is unfit for the office. I don't, I lived in Texas in a rural area for, a number of years, and, all my neighbors were Trump supporters. And I say that, like, if I had to describe them in one word, it would be kind. They were considerate neighbors. They were good people. They were hardworking, compassionate, and just good people. And so I think, like, we got to be careful not to do the basket of deplorables thing
Yeah,
when it comes to our
clever that worked for
neighbors.
the left, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it,
that did not work.
it
It's
didn't
just
work at all.
no. So let's not malign people based on their political affiliation. But you know, Trump did create a meme coin, and in an act of blatant corruption, you know, just took billions from investors, and it appears to just be a self-interested, vain, and deeply uh, egocentric, monster, really. And that's, I don't think that's a harsh judgment. That doesn't mean he doesn't make a good decision. Sometimes he's made plenty of good decisions. That doesn't mean he's a good person. It doesn't mean he's a fit leader. That doesn't mean that he has wisdom or courage or any of the values that we ought to expect in a leader, that holds the highest office in the land. So no, I mean, Trump will only do what serves Trump. I think that's been pretty clear. Um, you know, our kids and grandchildren, like, we're going to have history books that say the words "access Hollywood" and "grab them by the pussy." That's the legacy of Trump. And I'm sorry if that's offensive, but that's what he said. So I judge people based on how they act and what they do, and not what Hannity says about them. Where are we going with this? I forgot where we're going with this. I
I
lost,
was just
completely lost my.
no, just the Trump being sort of held up as the emblem of
Oh,
transparency,
no.
and
I mean, if it's
it's like
convenient,
that's
and
a
if he can
farce.
be convinced to do it, great, and I'll applaud him, and if I'll say good decision, Trump. Like, if he, is able to responsibly, peel the lid off this thing. But yeah, I thought Rubio, saying, oh, stuff taken out of context, but you had to sell a show. I mean, what a cop out, what a cowardly thing to say. I mean, I watched this guy with the 1,000-yard stare, look into the distance, and say, yeah, like these guys are saying, there's reverse engineering programs, and I'm not going to call them liars. And and I thought he spoke with eloquence and honesty and
Yeah,
restraint. And I was very impressed with him. I was not impressed with his subsequent interviews, which I saw Rubio, the politician, Rubio, the scared child, Rubio, looking out for his career, trying to walk back, what he said because his friends were making fun of him, maybe. That was disappointing, but, good on Dan Farrar for capturing the right moments. I don't think, I just, it looked like there were not a lot of cuts, and that he was speaking with remarkable fluidity and honesty. about like, hey, look what happened at Pearl Harbor. Nobody thought that the Japanese were going to bomb, Pearl Harbor, and look what happened. Nobody thought 9/11. I thought those were all great points. That strategic surprise happens when it's not the thing you're expecting to happens.
Yeah.
So like I thought I was very impressed with what he said, and I was very unimpressed with his later remarks that I thought smacked of timidity.
Yeah, it's interesting with him. He's always been frustrating in that way, where I see glimpses of his
He's a politician.
ability. Yeah, I mean, and
Yeah.
he's sort of like the emblematic politician because I see value in his intellect and like at times he has bearing and gravitas, and then he wilts when he wants to move forward politically, and it's kind
Yeah.
of
Well, I
frustrating
think
and
it's
gross.
different. Like politicians are kind of like to some extent they have to be chameleons, and like it doesn't mean that doesn't mean
Yeah,
that they're evil. But like when you go on Age of Disclosure, it's like, okay, let's go, Marco. We're gonna like really tear the house down with this, and he
uh,
did. And then when you go on Fox News, you're gonna have a lot of old people who think UFOs are stupid. Like you got to change your tone a little, Marco. And like that's probably what he's thinking. I don't think he's thinking, well, these are probably just Chinese drones. That must be the explanation for everything is a drone. I think he's very intelligent. I think he's better than that. I just think he's a politician, and politicians sometimes have to say things that they don't mean, and it's just kind of the nature. I mean, that's why I can never be a politician because like so much of what they say is bullshit. Clearly,
yeah. And when you're a Secretary of State in an administration, you can't get out over your skis in terms of the rest of, the office around you. You need to kind of be play a part of their message machine. And so maybe he was just
yeah.
reeled in by Trump, and that was him trying to
That
make
could
it
be. I mean,
good.
he could have been. He could have gotten a slap on the wrist, like Marco. You need to calm down because we don't even have control of the situation. I mean, you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. He might have been told to just, hey, talk about drones if you want. Like, do not talk about NHI, Marco. Like, it might have been like that, and maybe who knows?
Yeah, who knows? You were mentioning earlier Heidegger and technology. That's one of the fascinating angles on all this that I keep coming back to, especially as we get closer and closer to an artificial general intelligence, what that's going to mean for humanity. And I kind of equated there's this whole Gnostic idea of there's to get vaguely religious for a second, there was the idea of the creator, but then there's also the demiurge, right? Like you have the genuine source, which is everything, and then you have this sort of slightly insane creature that was created and doesn't know it was created and tries to play the role of God, even though they're not actually in that position. And I kind of often equate our building of an artificial general intelligence as us kind of standing up our own demiurge in a way. And I'm not convinced it's going to go negatively, as that might imply. But what are your thoughts on where technology is leading, and especially artificial intelligence? I mean, there's so much possibility, so many obvious, advantages to having a machine that can be, more intelligent than we can and can do calculations that we can't even begin to conceptualize. But there's also danger there. So, what are your thoughts? Are you a Luddite who is afraid of technology, or do you think that that is, obviously going to be our saving grace?
Yeah, well, I just wrote a series of essays about this, and I think we have to be really wary of people who are really, really confident in a very binary way, like, AI is going to be the death of us kind of way. Or,
The
if
savior.
you're a politician, you're evil. If you're a spook or you're an FBI agent or whatever, you must be dishonest. Um, and the same goes for technology. I mean, this is a very complex evolution that we're going through. We're kind of writhing in these growing pains right now and trying to understand. I mean, I'm looking on X and I'm just seeing comments like maybe it is sentient. No, it's not sentient. It's a probability distribution. Like it's calm down. Like it's not it's not alive, guys. Like it's not very well understood. Um, People don't understand that it's like a more sophisticated version of spell check in Word. It's just really good at guessing, what you want it to say, based on the inputs, and that's great. Like it's great to have a tool like that, and it's going to open up a lot of possibilities. People hate it, they love it, they think it's uh, maybe going to destroy society. But and this is what I wrote about in one of my recent essays, which is that every major technological breakthrough, there have been there has been like this theological dread of this is going to be the end of the thinking man. And it goes back to Socrates with the written word when he uh, was lamenting the fact that people's minds are going to go to mush because you're not memorizing things anymore. You got to be, what's going to happen to your mind if you're just putting it all on paper? But what happened was, yes, we didn't become we became a little bit worse at memorizing things, but it opened up this whole world, a cathedral of new space because you're storing all this information on an external hard drive, kind of like what you do.
Mhm.
And now you can do other stuff. It
Yeah.
frees up capacity. The same thing happened with the printing press. People were furious about the printing press. That belongs in the monasteries. Well, look what happened. It democratized learning. Like, what could be more beautiful than that? Anyone who wanted to read the Bible could read the Bible. Led to the Reformation of Christianity. I'd say it's better now than it was in 1300, wouldn't you? Led to a lot of good things. And the same, I think, could be true of AI if we stop hiding from it, if we stop insisting that the only way to really learn philosophy is you got to read Hegel from start to finish. Like, hey, do philosophy PhDs, do they think that this is good writing, like a translated Kant? Like, it's not, you don't want to write like that. Like, it's not good writing. It's the ideas that were important. It was the concepts, it was the frameworks. And you need to understand it in a granular way with nuance, but you don't need to read every word of that book, guys. You need to have some facility with the concepts and be able to weave them together and to compare and contrast and to evaluate. Like, that's what thinking is. That's what really complex layered thinking is. And there's no, you don't get points for just like having a lot of old books on your shelf. I know academics love to show their bookshelves, and it is impressive that you can sit and read a book that boring. Um, but we ought to democratize it. We ought to allow people to absorb this information in maybe a radical way. Maybe there will be uh, chatbots that can you can learn the French Revolution in like a few hours and have a very deep understanding of. I don't know what that would look like, but I could imagine a very malleable sort of model that adapts to the learning of the student. And I don't know, but there's a lot of possibilities, and you don't have to read these terrible books that they're not all great. Like, let's just be honest. Like, it wasn't the prose that made Hannah Arendt or that made uh, The Veil of Ignorance, John Rawls. Like, what a beautiful contribution, uh, to the way we think about our legal system is the Veil of Ignorance. And what that meant was that when you are designing social policy, you should have this shield over your eyes where you don't know where you're going to sit. You might be the poorest person, sweeping the floors in Home Depot, or you might be, uh, Elon Musk, and that's the measure of a great society, the one that cares about the marginalized people. And but it was an awful, like, it wasn't a well written, like, he wasn't known for his writing. It was the ideas that were beautiful, and there's so much of that. And gosh, I wish they would be less snobbish about that. But that's what they do, academics, I think.
It's
A lot of
interesting.
them.
Last time we spoke, we were talking about that in terms of education. And there's sort of you had gotten into some trouble with some teachers, I think, or some folks who were saying that, like, basically reading is everything, and that if kids are more drawn to, a graphic user interface as a way to learn, or whatever else, that just means we're shifting tools, not necessarily that we're getting dumber and dumber. Can you talk a little bit
Yeah.
about
Well,
that? I mean, it's
language
sort
is
of the same.
important, I think. I mean, we
Yeah,
it's part of our the structure of our thought is the language. So I mean, we have to be able to express ourselves like uh with nuance, and we have to be able to absorb nuance, and language is a fundamental aspect of that. I'm not advocating like let's just watch TV, or like let's just make it all TikTok influencers just explaining it in a really charismatic way and have them all be very attractive people, who just look like movie stars. Like, I'm not saying that at all. I don't want
yeah,
that.
yeah.
But there are ways, I think, to absorb language in in a palatable way that actually is profound, because you can have students absorb concepts very quickly because it's written in a way that they can understand, not without nuance or without granularity or without structure. and it's not like a really attractive, person saying it in a way that flattens the nuance. Like no one's advocating. I hope no one's advocating for that.
Yeah,
But
just to be clear,
we're
the context of this was someone had noticed that students coming into class now don't really have favorite books or authors, right? Wasn't
yeah,
that
yeah,
the
yeah.
original? Yeah,
So this was the Brown University professors. Like they don't even pretend to read anymore. Like they used to say like, yes, I really love the book Lord of the Flies or something. But now they just like, I don't read. And uh, that's a problem because there's no alternative to reading books right now, really. I mean, I mean, there's AI, but like you're not really getting the same level of depth. It's not that sophisticated yet. The tools,
yeah.
they're just not. I mean, they're great, but you're not going to learn more in most cases uh, by I guess in many cases, by never reading a book and just using the internet, I think you're going to be really shortchanging yourself. But there may come a day where that's no longer true because the tools get so sophisticated that you can absorb, beautiful language that just it wasn't the way John Rawls wrote it, but that's okay because the ideas are still there. So
That's all part of this evolutionary process that we're going through. I mean,
yeah.
it's always changing, and we're always going to be adapting to new
Yeah, and right now
media.
we're
And I think that
stuck in
that's
this
okay.
awkward phase where they're not reading books, but the AI tools maybe are not that advanced yet to where there's been an adequate replacement because there's this resistance of like, if it's a backlit screen, it's evil. We're gonna have to get past that, because these kids are not reading the books from cover to cover anymore. They're just not. So we can either face reality that this is their neurochemistry that's been marinated in this dopamine for 15 years, and maybe they're just not capable of reading, Emma by Jane Austen, great novel. But they're not going to read Emma anymore. That's okay, because there are other options. Uh,
Um,
if we use our imaginations,
One of the things that initially drew me to you and your work was the idea that writing can be used as a mode of transformation. Um,
Hmm.
can you talk about
Yeah.
that? I mean, how do you use writing for yourself in terms of self-exploration, and how has it helped you kind of construct this new world that you seem to be entering for yourself, which
Well, I
seems
don't
rife
really
with
think deeply
possibility?
about something until I write about it, I find. And it sounds crazy, but like with my son, when I didn't really stop and think about, and this is kind of a guy thing, I think. Like we just kind of go and it's like I gotta hunt, I gotta go hunt, and like I go to work and I come home and you go to sleep, you get up, you work out, you do all these things. And uh there's not a lot of contemplation for me that happens unless I write. And when I wrote the essay about my son who's nonverbal, all these I had this experience where I was sitting in my office alone at 2 a.m. and I cried about it. Like for the first time, I didn't get emotional about it. And like and I remember I shared the piece. I couldn't get it published anywhere, so I shared it with my friends. I didn't have a Substack, and these are not emotional guys. Like a lot of them are ex-military and finance guys. They're just not prone to really emotive conversations. And most of them cried when they read it, and it 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 was like they came to me and they were like, "Wow, I wish you had talked to me about it, Greg. Like I didn't know yeah, I didn't know you were going through that." And I was like, it wouldn't have occurred to me to talk to you about it because I didn't even know what I was going through until I wrote about it. And I put all those events down on paper and I sat with it, the weight of it. It was very powerful for me. And I think that that's been true of a lot of things that I've written about. And maybe that doesn't work. Maybe writing is not the key to that for everyone. For some people, it's meditation. I can't really meditate. I have I have a very short attention span, and I struggle with the meditation thing. I wish I could. I'd like to float out of my body and go up into the astral just as much as the next guy, but I just, I don't get there that way. But I think some form of contemplation is essential. I think to living an examined life for
Yeah.
sure.
It's the reason why it struck me that the whole idea is that that's sort of the method through which I got clean. Ultimately, is I was a journalist and I had my issues, and I ended up quitting so I could go to rehab. That didn't work out. I ended up kind of doing the business for like probably a year and a half after that. And then ultimately, I did go to rehab. I did get clean, and I started to try and kind of reconstruct my life from the wreckage. And at the same time, I was someone who was known around the community because I had been the city editor of the local paper before it all happened.
Mm,
So
really?
I was the most famous heroin addict in all of my region, which was
Wow.
unfortunate. But the upside was is that people respected my writing. So there was an online newspaper in Humboldt County that was like, "Hey, are you interested in writing a column for us about whatever you want?" And I ended up using it as a platform for me to like ruminate on the causes of my addiction and the process of getting clean and family trauma and all of those things. And made over 2 years published weekly on all these sorts of issues and really
Mm,
was able to kind of pass a lot of
mm,
blockages that had kept me from
yeah.
kind of maturing or figuring myself out. And it all came through these 300 word columns I was publishing in the local paper, and it was all public, and that forced me to be forced me into a certain slot in terms of what I was allowed to express, but also kept me diligently honest about it. And
What
anyway,
were the
yeah,
kind of topics? Was it about recovery, you're saying? Was it about like
yeah,
what you
it
went
started out.
through?
Well, it was called Dead Reckoning, and what was interesting about it is I was working at a cemetery at the time. I just gotten this job as a office manager at a cemetery, and so it started out being like reflecting on death and process and those sorts of things. And I talked about the death of my father, and then that led to some of the traumatic experiences that I'd had because he was a paranoid schizophrenic,
Oh, geez.
and sometimes violent, but it wasn't his fault, but it is what it is. And so that sort of led me into, linking some of the traumatic events with some of the thoughts that I would have later on, and the anxiety that arose out of those situations. And that led me to, mental health, and then to and then one day I was just like, I just need to tell everybody what happened and how I ended up on drugs. And so I charted that out, and then I began to talk about how recovery happened for me and what it meant to recover and what it took. And yeah, just this sort of
It's
rambling
it's so beautiful that you did that because this is what so many people fail to understand. They don't forgive themselves. They just they won't they'll be good to their friend, but they won't cut themselves any slack.
yeah,
And because you were able to do that, you touched a lot of lives, and that's how you find the meaning in what you went through. Otherwise, you were just doing heroin. But instead, you were honest and you were self-reflective, and you cared about other people enough to tell them about what you went through, and that mattered to a lot of people, I'm sure. And just your ability to talk about it with authenticity here. There could be somebody who listens to your podcast and who's thinking like, wow, I don't know if I'm ever gonna get over this. I don't know if I'm ever gonna pull myself out of this addiction. And then they look at what you're doing, and you seem to be doing great. I'll tell you, you look very good for a 50. I would not have guessed 50 years old. You look much younger. I don't know what you're doing. I'm not going to ask about like Botox or anything. It's none of my business, but um, it's impressive, where you are now versus where you were, and it's inspiring to a lot of people because you forgave yourself and because you talked about it.
yeah.
And there's meaning in that. Like there's something really beautiful in that. Like to go through something that like brings so much shame upon you, but to not be scared of it and to be honest about it. Because like that's how you get the good stuff that comes from it.
Yeah, it all really came down to my wife, who is real, has been my partner since I was 18, and we've been
No, it's
together
good you were
through.
able to keep it together. I didn't know that. That's good that you were able to
Yeah,
keep it
yeah,
together.
she's probably the main reason why I was able to recover. But like I said, I was public. It was all in the news and whatnot. So I was dealing with a lot of shame issues, and I didn't want to go out because people would say, "Oh, that's that guy. He's the dude who was."
Hmm.
And it was debilitating for a while. And then my wife was like, "Well, you could either, give up and wilt away, or you could rock it. It's
Yeah,
basically
yeah,
like, yeah, that happened, but I'm better now, and here's how."
yeah.
And
And I'll tell you, if you're
her
a
sort of
guy and you're
encouraging
listening to
me.
this now, like I've learned this over the years, and it's pretty simple. Like the woman is usually right, like just in a probability sense, probabilistic. Usually
Ah,
she's right about most things, and so you just accept that, and then you move on.
yeah, if you want to have a happy marriage, you better.
Yeah, yeah.
I love her to death. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's pretty much all I had for you today. I appreciate your perspective in this conversation, and I hope that you'll be a regular guest on the show if that's something
I
that
would love
appeals
that.
to
I
you.
didn't think this was going to get this deep. Jesus, man, you got guys. Be careful if you're coming on the James Falk. You're coming on Neon Galactic because he'll get deep on you. But this was a good conversation. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, man.